Well, this is Dominic Impastato, Councilman for District 4. Thank you all for joining us for the Lafreniere sub-area plan. I've talked to a couple of media outlets to explain that this is not related to, for those of you who are not on the committee who are just joining us as interested members of the public, this is not about the interior of the park. This is for the renovation and redevelopment of all the areas outside of Lafreniere Park, the neighborhoods, basically the areas that run from the corner of David Drive and West Napoleon through Veterans, and from Veterans basically to the entrance of Lafreniere Park. This is part of an overall economic redevelopment plan and revitalization that we're trying to have occur on both the commercial and the residential corridor in that area. So far, we've created a TIF district around that area to hopefully provide some tax incentives that would encourage redevelopment and reinvestment into that area. We've also implemented a property tax abatement program where funds that are used to do substantial renovations of properties within that area could potentially qualify for a property tax abatement for monies they've used for that. But a key piece of this has to do with the overall facade improvements to the areas in that corridor. And that includes land use changes, code changes. I apologize for the background noise. Code changes, signage regulation changes, and a number of different changes along those lines. So as part of that, we hired some consultants, outside consultants, who can then introduce themselves, who also partnered with other consultants from one of the local universities, and they have the results of some meetings we've been having over the course of the last, I guess, year almost, and they're going to show the results of some of that, some proposed changes to that area, and our purpose tonight is to get as much input as possible from the public, from those of you who are following this. Let us know. We want to know what you feel. We want to know if the vision that has developed from the stakeholders committee that we put together, the business owners in the area, and our consultants, is consistent with what you see as the vision for your area, because this is all our community, so we want everybody on board. And certainly, want to get an idea of what the feeling is from the public on what we're doing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over at this point. In my office, District 4 office is monitoring this specifically, so we're gathering all the input, taking down notes of everything that's being said, and we hope that you enjoy what you're about to see. So with that, I'll turn it over at this point.
Thank you, Councilman. We'll get right into our presentation. My name's Bruce Richards. I'm with NY Associates. But we're here to talk to you guys tonight about the implementation of the Lafreniere sub-area plan. Hold on just a second. Okay. All right, tonight we're going to have Zoom participation. Just to give you guys a little overview on this, you can adjust your audio settings for the Zoom meeting over there on the left-hand side. You can use the chat button, which is down near the bottom there, to send messages to hosts and panelists. A little raise hand in the webinar if you want to speak. And we're going to, through the process, we're going to maybe stop every so often and allow people to ask questions and speak. Or if you want to just write a question down, we already have one already. You can open the Q&A window and actually type out your question, and we will address all the questions tonight, probably at the end of the process. And we'll start with getting some feedback from you guys with our first poll question, and we'll run through this one really quickly to kind of get a sense of where everybody's coming from and to make sure our poll system works. The first one question is, what is your connection to the project? Are you A, a resident of the neighborhood study area? Are you B, a business owner in the study area? Are you C, a landlord in the study area? Or D, just an interested citizen? You can go ahead and click with your mouse on one of those four suggestions. And we'll give you guys a few seconds, about a minute or so to think about this and put it in there.
All right, about to close the poll. All right,
Thank
can
you,
you
Brooke.
see the result?
Thank you, Brooke. As we can see from the results of the poll, the largest majority are just interested, about 63% of our respondents. We do have 17% of landlords in the study area, and 21% are residents of the neighborhood or the study area. I think this is a pretty good breakdown. I was hoping we might get some business owners from the David Drive or the commercial areas along Veterans, but I'm glad to see that we have a lot of people that are interested in this process. And it looks like we have 38 participants on board as well. So I'm glad to see that we've got so many people coming into this meeting, even though it is a virtual meeting. Let's see. So bear with me. We have to get through this a little more quickly. Let's try this again. Still not quite working. A little bit of lag time. Okay. Tonight's agenda. First off, some brief introductions. You've already heard from Councilman Dominic Impastato of District 4. He's one of the key people, of course, that has been pushing this project along. He's very involved in it, as you could tell. We also have the participation and support from the administration themselves, of course, led by Parish President Cynthia Lee Sheng. Present tonight online as part of our panelists and assisting us is Juliet Kassan, who's the planning director for the parish. We also have Ms. Brooke Tolbert, who is the assistant planning director for the parish. Again, I introduced myself earlier. I'm Bruce Richards with NY Associates. We're the lead planning consultants for the project. And I'm assisted by Ms. Lydia Jemison of Jemison & Partners, our sub-consultant on the project, who's helping me out tremendously. We also have with us Mr. Nicholas Jenish from the Tulane School of Architecture. He's been helping us a lot in terms of the design considerations on this project that I believe the councilman mentioned earlier. We also have with us tonight Ms. Annalisa Kelly. She's Director of Strategic Initiatives at JEDCO. And she's going to talk a little bit more at length about the restoration tax abatement program that Councilman Impastato touched upon earlier. Finally, we also have some of the staff, as Councilman Impastato indicated, from his office. We're also on board, Ms. Brenda Campos and Mr. Mike Quigley. So we'll move on. That's our first agenda item. The second will be where we are moving forward with our planning efforts. And we'll give you a progress report, plan implementation so far. There's been a lot of concrete things that have been happening in the study area that's going to move progress within the Lafreniere footprint. Then we'll get kind of the meat of what we've been doing, the research and recommendations. We're going to talk very briefly about one or two plan changes from the original sub-area plan that was completed in 2019. We'll get into the depth about the zoning changes in the area. First off, for the commercial areas, Nick will talk a little bit about the design considerations for that, and we'll delve a little deeper into signage in those commercial areas. Then we'll talk about the suggested zoning changes for the residential areas, and Nick will also get into design considerations about renovations and rehabilitations and changes in those residential areas. Finally, we'll kind of wrap up. We'll talk about response, input, and feedback, try to answer all your questions that you post tonight, and we'll give you opportunities and tell you where you can post some more input or have questions sent to us following this meeting if you have something come up in the next week or so. But let's get to it then. Why we're getting stuck here, but apparently we are. Okay. First off, moving forward with our planning efforts. The first phase of planning for the entire Lafreniere area started back in 2018. It focused on the park itself. There's a task force established. They had a priorities for the park programs and facilities that was developed. And a lot of that has actually been done or is underway. The soccer complex improvements, which is a $2.4 million project, that's estimated to be completed later this spring, maybe a little later. COVID's messing up schedules and everything. But that's a public-private partnership and was signed last year. It's not all public money. Different things within the park, the food pavilion, the sculpture garden, parking lot, accessibility improvements, bridge improvements, restroom additions. These are all underway in moving forward. The concert meadow upgrade, and they're still looking at how to work the entrance from David Drive at York Street. Currently, the only entrances are off of Veterans via Downs Boulevard or directly off of West Napoleon. Phase 2 of the improvements to the whole Lafreniere area in 2019 focused on the strategic plan, the sub-area plan. That plan was completed by another consultant for the parish that analyzed land use, transportation, socioeconomic, and other data. That plan, when it was underway and worked on, received input from you guys, the general public. They had stakeholder interviews, they had online outreach, and 2 open houses. They looked at different alternative development scenarios for the area. They created a plan implementation table, which is what we're doing now, plan implementation. And in November of 2019, the parish council actually adopted this plan, the sub-area plan for Lafreniere, into the overall Envision Jefferson 2040 comprehensive plan. So this plan is actually adopted by the council. Now, phase 3, the one we're under now, began last year, and it focuses on plan implementation. How can we get these pretty pictures, these ideas, and get these into some form of reality? We were tasked with fine-tuning the master plan concept and the transportation plan concept. We've been evaluating existing land use and zoning, especially signage, and we recommended some changes. And Nick and his group have evaluated the architectural design, and they've been showing some concepts or proposing guidelines, some of which you'll share tonight. And that's in both areas, the town center kind of commercial mixed use area, and then in housing in the residential areas. Now we're going to give you a progress report on plan implementation, things that are actually underway and things that were recommended plan that we're moving towards. The first of these dealt with developing the Soniat Greenway. Now, as you can see from this picture over here on the right, the Soniat Greenway is that green space between the Soniat Canal and the rear of the properties on the west side of David Drive. It's currently where the power lines go. It's basically a power line right-of-way, but you've got a lot of ground space in there that's open and green and can be used, and we're looking to use it for recreation and access. This project is currently in design by the firm Digital Engineering, and it's in preliminary design. Now, the parish has already applied for Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP, funding from the state DOTD. Now, should the parish receive this funding, then we'll go into final construction documents and final design. And the design process for such projects usually runs about a year to a year and a half. And if the full construction is available from the TAP grant and other sources, then we can advertise a construction bid and get this thing built. Another big one is the improvement of David Drive. As you can see on the picture to the right, and you might have seen this in driving around, it's already underway. Back in 2015 and 16, the project was funded through a tax measure through the parish, and the engineering design began. And the engineering is supposed to include median or neutral ground, as we call them down here, and landscaping where feasible, some new subsurface drainage and other utility work, and bicycle path. In 2018 and 2019, they acquired some right-of-way which was needed, and the task order for street lighting was issued. And then last year, the construction contract order was awarded and construction began. And it is scheduled to be complete by the end of this summer. Again, with COVID, things are a little iffy, but it is on track and underway. So we'll have a much more beautiful and much more efficient David Drive in the future. And now I'm going to turn it over to Annalisa Kelly, who's she's the Director of Strategic Initiatives with JEDCO. And she's going to talk a little bit about the Restoration Tax Billing Program, specifically that's been approved and developed by the parish. Annalisa, if you could take over.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Annalisa Kelly here with JEDCO. JEDCO, for your knowledge, is the Jefferson Parish Economic Development Commission. We're the economic development arm of the parish, although we are a separate entity from parish government. And we're here to help existing and prospective businesses find success, as well as other initiatives that just help with the quality of life of the parish. So for everyone's knowledge, and Councilman Impastato mentioned this at the top of this presentation, the Restoration Tax Abatement Program, or the RTA program, it's a state and local incentive that encourages improvements and renovations made to existing structures in specific eligible districts. And the district in the Lafreniere area was recently created by the council. So this area is eligible for this program. The RTA program does this through a property tax abatement, meaning if you make significant improvements to a property that includes the exterior or the facade of that building, your property taxes on the improvements will be abated for a 5-year period with the potential for an additional 5-year renewal, totaling a potential 10 years of a tax abatement on those improvements. So it's there to encourage investment and improvements and renovations to buildings in certain districts, including this one. This is eligible for all property owners. You must, it has to be an existing structure, so not vacant land. You must apply for this incentive to take place through JEDCO and LED. LED is the state agency for economic development. And then JEDCO, we will help, we will assist in the approval process on the local and the state levels. One thing to note, this program is not retroactive, meaning you must submit an advance notification, that's what the initial application is called, before any improvements are made, or those improvements will not be eligible. But this is just a great tool for anyone considering renovations to their properties. It's open to both residential and commercial property owners, as you can see here. It's owner-occupied single-family residences, as well as commercial structures and multifamily residential structures. And that's an overview of the program, but I would encourage anyone who would like more information to reach out to me, and we'll have that contact information at the end of this presentation.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Again, this is a great program, and this has been crafted, if I'm not mistaken, Annalisa, specifically for our study area, basically boundaries, Sonia Canal, West Napoleon, I think Judith Street, I-10 and Veterans, correct?
Correct. Those are the boundaries. And actually, we have a map on JEDCO's website that shows the exact geographical area. But yes, this was created by the parish council in October to encompass the area you just described.
Thank you very much. Finally, another task on plan implementation was to evaluate existing zoning and determine appropriate zoning to promote revitalization and improve aesthetics. That's what we've been working on since May or June of last year. We've done a lot of research, and we now have some recommendations for implementation to actually start making things look a little better in both the commercial and the residential areas. Some of the things we came up with: plan changes. There's one specific area of the sub-area plan that was going to be a little different. Also, zoning changes. Specifically, there's some zoning changes that we're recommending in the commercial sector. A lot of it has to do with signage. And then a little bit later on, commercial area design consideration will be discussed by Nick. He'll talk all about how things may look under these new zoning regs. And then we'll talk about some of the zoning changes we're recommending for the residential areas. Most of these are north and northwest of the park. And it's similarly, Nick will also discuss residential area design considerations, how things may look if they're renovated and follow the new zoning regulations. So first off, plan changes. The only real plan change we're looking at is that in the plan itself, it recommended a new town center be developed off of Veterans, very close to the areas centered between York Street, Trenton Street, Longwood, and Sonia Canal. Basically, we're looking at the area where the old Kmart was, the Magnolia Shopping Center. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see what was actually in the plan, how they envisioned it with a little town square and new streets going through the area and everything. You can see how it looks today, the existing old Kmart site, the Magnolia Shopping Center. we recommend a slight change to this after a lot of consideration with the parish and with the task force and other reasons. We think that it would be appropriate to shift the town center from that area, the Magnolia Center, over to David Drive itself. One of the reasons why that's in play is because David Drive is a smaller roadway. It's getting ready to have a lot of physical improvement. There's going to be a greenway right behind it. And it just it is a better fit for a walkable, use, mixed use kind of town center, the kind of thing that you might envision in the picture on the right. So that would be an actual change to the plan itself. It's about the only major one that we're looking at. But now let's start looking at existing land use and zoning and talk about recommended zoning changes. This is a map of Veterans Boulevard. As you can see, that's the white strip on your north. Pretty much everything along Veterans is zoned C2. That's everything in the red. There's one apartment complex kind of hidden in there that is zoned R3 multifamily, but pretty much everything is zoned high intensity C2 commercial along Veterans Boulevard. There's different uses. If you look at the outline colors, the orange is retail, and you can see the Magnolia Shopping Center. It's all kind of small retail spaces. There's different types of things such as the car dealerships. There's some restaurants, gas stations, etc. But for the most part, this is a very high intensity kind of use along Veterans Boulevard. And what we'd like to do is to kind of keep that. We think that we want to retain that high intensity C2 commercial. It does have a CPZ overlay, which provides for some nice landscaping and everything. We feel this is consistent with the existing veterans land use and zoning and the character of the corridor. And it does promote the reuse of that large Magnolia Shopping Center site that contains the old Kmart. Let's move on to David Drive. We would like to promote, as I mentioned, a mixed-use walkable David Drive. We think it's conducive to smaller scale, Main Street, town center approach. It's already reflected in the lower zoning classification of C1. I could also build on that Soniet Greenway, which is going to have a multi-use path, a rear-serving roadway or alleyway, bike paths, pedestrian crossings across the canal, and some other roadway improvements in the area, particularly David Drive. Now, we think that this would best be accomplished by putting in a new zoning district. Still working on this. It's called the Town Center Mixed Use District, or TCMU. Here's an idea just to show you how different things may look in the different areas compared to how it's been built in the past and how we may look to build it in the future. The one on the left is David Drive at West Des Pointes, the French Press coffee shop. Again, it's a nice site. It's very well done. It's landscaping, has sidewalks, but it's definitely more auto-oriented. It's got a large sign. Aesthetically, it may not be as nice. If you look over at Metairie Road on the right-hand side, a recent development is this one, the Old Metairie Commons. Again, this is more what we're thinking for David Drive. It's a little bit closer. It's definitely more of a walkable sense, right on a sidewalk. The parking goes towards the side and the back. And most importantly, in addition to the commercial uses on the bottom, you have residential uses on the top two floors. And as we all know, residential is a key thing in the parish, affordable residential and just residential in general. So let's look at the existing standards of the current C1 district as it is on David Drive right now. Right now, any single, two-family, three-family, four-family residential, that's prohibited. You can't build any more residential along David Drive. You could have some dwelling units in a mixed-use building, and you could have a multifamily residential allowed only above ground floor non-residential. That's the current zoning. Only low-intensity commercial uses are allowed. They're limited to 25,000 square foot ground floor area for retail services. And if you just have offices, you can go up to 30,000. Your front yard, you need a minimum of 20 feet, just like in a residential district. And parking is allowed in that front 20 feet in front of the building. Attached signs, these are signs on a building. Those are limited to 3 square feet per the linear foot of building frontage, or 50% of elevation area. Now, your detached signs, the ones that are out towards the curb, you have pole signs, you can have roof signs, monument signs, all that stuff's allowed. Your building height, it's a 45-foot maximum height, which is allowed automatically by right. And if you build a building with multiple dwelling units, they can be up to 70 feet, subject to certain criteria. And finally, landscaping design standards. Now, along streets and between uses and other design standards is required only when a special overlay district applies, such as CPZ or CPZ PED. Again, currently, this area does have CPZ overlay, so there is a little bit of landscaping required. Let's go on to the next one, the potential standards of a new TCMU district. Now, I'll try to compare it, give you the comparison as we go along. First off, uses allowed. You can build a 2, 3, 4, 5-family detached residential in a TCMU district. You could build a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex. You could build attached townhouses, dwellings. You can have retail, service, office uses. Those are only limited, though, to 10,000, 12,500 square feet. And again, you can build residential on top of commercial uses in a mixed-use district. Front yard, as opposed to currently, instead of a 20-foot minimum, this one would have a 10-foot maximum, and you could get an additional 5 foot under certain conditions. We're trying to bring the buildings a little closer to the street. Parking, again, would not be allowed in front of the building line. It would be alongside or behind any new construction. Attached signs. This is where we're going to try to get a little more restrictive. One flat sign, building its flat signs, limited to about half what it is in the C1, 1.5 square feet as opposed to 3 per linear foot of building frontage. Now, you can also have additional signage allowed on your awnings or on hanging signs that are attached to the building. Detached signs, your monument signs only, no more pole signs, maximum of 50 square feet. So you're thinking about 7 by 7, 5 by 10. Building height, 50-foot maximum height allowed by right. That's only 5 foot more than what it is now. And if you had any type of detached residential, it's the traditional 35 feet for any detached 2, 3, and 4 family residential. Finally, landscaping design standards. This is where it's going to come into play as well. Landscape buffers would be required where you abut residential or institutional. Your street-facing fronts, your facades must have a minimum % of openings, windows and doors. We have some prohibited materials that we're talking about. You can't have plain concrete block. Can't have vinyl, can't have metal with exposed fasteners like a warehouse building. And your automobile-oriented uses, such as a drive-through, would be subject to extra standards. So let's look at a map of how it is right now, the existing land use and zoning along David Drive. Veterans over here in this shot is on the left. David Drive comes all the way down to West Napoleon, which is on your right. Everything with the pink underlayment of zoning is C1. The red, again, is C2 over on Veterans Boulevard. As you can see from the chart here, land use is the colors that outline each of the parcels. Most of the parcels in this area are outlined in black, which is retail sales and service, spread out all along the length of David Drive. But surprisingly, there's a lot of existing residential along David Drive in all different categories. There's a single-family use right here. There's a few two-family uses, quite a few two-family uses. There's some triplexes. There's at least one in the area. There's a few fourplexes, and there's a multifamily residential apartment building right on the corner of York Street. There's quite a few restaurants, of course. You know, everything from Waffle House to Papa John's Pizza, Little Caesar's Pizza, Ground Patty, etc. And there's a couple of vacant lots. There's also a few healthcare and medical. So we've got a wide range of uses along David Drive. Now, if we were following our recommendations, we would switch that zoning to proposed zoning of TCMU. And that would be everything here in this kind of avocado mint green. As you can see, it would be able to handle most of the zoning, the current land uses in this area. What we're talking about here is this would be a new neighborhood center. Again, be zoned from C1 and RR3 in these areas would be changed to a new TCMU. And we would transition on the north end from Veterans C2 zoning to the TCMU. On the south end, we would transition from the TCMU to R1A on the other side of West Napoleon. And we would do that, we would include the two uses on the other side of West Napoleon, the coffee shop and the medical office. Those would also be included under the TCMU zone. Now, of course, if this is a walkable area, you're going to need pedestrian crossings. We'd put one at Trenton, one at York, and one at West Napoleon. In this area on Longwood, right across from the other side of Longwood, we would want to keep this as RR3 as a transition to the new TCMU zoning. We figure that some of these buildings may even be able to be acquired by property owners in the front, or vice versa. They could be combined and create larger lots. But this is what we're looking for the new zoning along David Drive.
Bruce,
and I'm going to hand it over right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you move past the slide, I wanted to address, we did have a few questions. One was whether was my property maybe zoned commercial, and how will this affect me?
Okay. As you can see from the previous map, and let me see if I can go back. Oop, let's go back. The only areas that would be, and this isn't necessarily a commercial zoning, this is a new town center mixed use. Under our proposal, the only things that would be changed from a residential to any form of commercial would be the things on the western side of Longwood Drive. In other words, these areas right here. Everything else within the area, and we'll get to that residential in a little bit, would remain as residential zoning. How would this affect you? There's a lot of ways to look at that. And after I mention a couple of things, I'll allow either you, Brooke, or anyone else to chime in, from maybe Juliet. There's opportunities there that it may be combined with lots in the front. But all the current residential uses do fit under this zoning category and can remain. They are all 2 and 3 unit residential, which is an allowed use under TCMU.
So Bruce, what I do want to follow up in regards to the question about the change in zoning is, I also want to point out that any of those requirements of the TCMU regarding the exterior facades or landscapings, those requirements only come to play when a property owner is otherwise taking action on the property. Changing the zoning is not going to be require the property owners to then immediately do work. Those only come into effect if the property owner is already doing a renovation or demoing and doing new construction, would have to obviously be in compliance with the new zoning. And so to that, I think we also have a question: if a property is destroyed or burned, are they grandfathered in under the old zoning? And of course, the answer is, as a general policy, no. If you are completely destroyed when you build, you have to build under current zoning requirements, and depending upon what your property was previous, where your property is located. If it is destroyed, there is some provisions in the zoning code generally that has to do with the threshold. But again, as a general practice, when you're subject to a zoning change, depending upon if it's a complete, demolition or completely destroyed, there is some restoration, but I will say that, we would have to look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Are there any other questions that we want to look at this time before we move forward?
And I'll just kind of say, for those who may be listening or watching this via the Facebook or JPTV, there was a comment provided that the square footage seems small if you are encouraging housing over retail. So we appreciate that comment, and we will take that into consideration as we make final recommendations to the proposed zoning.
Okay. All righty. All right, then. I'm glad we're getting some feedback already. That's very good. Okay, now, again, I will be turning it over to Nick Jenish with the Tulane School of Architecture, who's been working with us on more of the design side rather than the zoning side. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about some stuff. Nick?
Thanks, Bruce. Again, Nick Jenish, Tulane School of Architecture and Small Center for Collaborative Design. We've worked with the parish on a number of projects in Fat City and Terrytown, so we're happy to be working with Bruce and the team and the parish again here. Basically, we're just going to provide some visuals to play some of this stuff out. So some of the design considerations for visual improvements. These are the improvements that potentially could come with a zoning change and the added sort of incentive of the tax abatement. So we'll look at renovations, new construction, landscaping, parking, those types of things. You can go to the next slide. This is a bit abstracted, but what you're looking at is actually some existing buildings on David Drive. And what I wanted to point out is the existing pole signs that you kind of see in a very light red there. The buildings are set back. The minimum setback is 20 feet current zoning. So what you end up with is a little bit of visual clutter. You end up with a lot of cars parking in front, rollover curbs. Those rollover curbs disallow a lot of room for landscaping. And so that's kind of the result of what the current zoning, what the original zoning sort of created in how these buildings were laid out. So if you go to the next slide, these are some potential changes. And obviously where it's, again, a little bit abstracted, there's a lot of new landscape here, but this indicates the actual plan for the renovations to the street itself that are underway to David Drive. So there'll be some landscaping or at least strips to separate traffic in certain areas. In addition, what you're able to do is put some of the parking in back with shared lanes. That becomes possible. It's difficult unless you have newly built buildings. You can't of course change everything. But there is also potential for a lane to be. There's a current plan and it's out for funding for a lane to be put in on the backside of these buildings along the canal in the area that Bruce pointed out earlier. If that's eventually funded, that would allow another access point for these businesses that would help you take some of that parking and vehicle traffic on the front side and put it in the back. So if you go to the next slide, just quickly, you can see in a little bit more detail, what you gain when you park in the back is a much more visually appealing streetscape. And so it's more pedestrian friendly. You can have planters, you can have landscaping, you can have outdoor dining for the restaurants that are there. And as you can see, there's one example of a monument sign there. So instead of these big pole signs that are really meant more for highway adjacent commercial properties, you get those lower down monument signs that are still visible to traffic. So businesses like that, they want to be seen, but they're just more visually appealing. So you go to the next slide. And this gets a little bit to the square footage question too. Part of the idea of changing zoning is that things happen slowly over time, right? Not everyone's going to tear down their building and build a new building. But over time, there are opportunities. Somebody might want to fully renovate their building. Someone might want to build on an empty lot. And so here we're just showing the difference between some of the existing buildings. You can see they're still set back 20 feet or so. And this right in the middle there, what we're proposing as a new build building and what that would look like. And just like the example Bruce showed in real life, the parking is in the back, it's on the side. You end up with a building that's much closer to the sidewalk and more pedestrian friendly, some spots for outdoor dining in front, and generally just more engaging to pedestrians. Go to the next slide. So we just wanted, this is a little bit more tactile, right? We just want to show you in real life. This is the issue with lack of landscaping. It's difficult to do when you need to park in front of your building. So even in existing buildings, because it's mostly built out, right? So we can't change things wholesale, but we can encourage things like the following slide, which just helps to delineate, use a tiny bit of landscaping where possible to delineate between properties, right? And so this is a simple use of some green and some trees and things like that. Removing some of the temporary signage that you saw in the previous slide allows us to spruce up some of these existing businesses. The next one's another example. You see the pole sign on the left, a lot of signage on the building itself, and not a lot of landscaping. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see what it would look like with some visual improvements. So you instead of a pole sign, you have a tree. You've still got visibility on the street because you've got a monument sign, and you've got a little bit more landscaping where possible. You take some of that signage on the building itself away. You still got as many parking spots as you did before, but it's very much visually improved. So those are the ideas behind those zoning changes, and we just want to play those scenarios out for you so you'd be able to see those. And by the way, these are the types of improvements that would be available and subject to those tax abatement, the tax abatement strategy. So it's possible to do these improvements. Someone had a question about their taxes, I think on the residential side, but the improvements would not be taxed for that initial 5 years and potentially longer. Bruce, you're on mute.
I sure was. Sorry about that. Thanks, Nick. With that, we'll get into our second poll question, talking about these zoning issues. Now, do you agree with a change in zoning along David Drive to create a more walkable built environment? Now, this zoning would bring buildings closer to the street with parking in the side and rear buildings, similar to recent developments on Metairie Road. Number 1 would be strongly disagree. Number 2 would just be disagree. 3 would be neutral, no opinion. 4 would be agree. And 5 would be strongly agree. So we look forward to you guys go ahead and filling these out, and we'll get a little instant poll feedback.
And Bruce, while
Yes,
people
ma'am.
are answering that question, I do want to address 2 more issues as it relates to the potential town center mixed-use zoning district. One is that this would be a new base zoning district, just like the C1. So we are taking a look at the uses allowed in the C1, and most, if not all of those uses would still be allowed in the town center mixed use. So in case that question earlier about how this affects their commercial zoning was also about what uses they would still be allowed to have, I did want to clarify that it maintains that mix of uses. And in regards to the question on the proposed limit threshold for 12,500 square feet for commercial uses, when we looked at the uses that are existing on David Drive, almost all of them are under that size threshold. So it would really be a property owner would have to consolidate a significant amount of property on David Drive in order to propose a building that would exceed that size, which again, we're trying to maintain sort of the small scale that we have existing on David Drive, and that's why we're proposing that threshold. So I did want to take that opportunity to include that.
Very good. I also want to add before we go through these findings here, I'm not sure I mentioned, I might have neglected to mention that this new proposed TCMU zoning, although it would be in place on David Drive, it will not be specific to David Drive. This will have application throughout the parish. Any other type of corridor that wants to maybe go towards a more walkable, environment can be look to use the same zoning classification.
Bruce, if I can jump in just real quick, just to address another question that popped up while we're on David Drive. They're talking about a lot of the existing properties not really being able to accommodate parking in the rear. And that's certainly true. So we certainly recognize that there's a lot of properties that are too close together to accommodate a lane between. And we certainly recognize that. Part of implementing the zoning is that you can make improvements where you can with landscaping and other things. And as properties are redeveloped, even over super long term, things can change that way. There's also potential. There are some properties where it could happen where you could have a shared lane between, and other properties where the lane behind along the canal will allow rear access.
That's some very good points there, Nick. I appreciate you bringing those up.
Right, and to reiterate to Nick's point, that's where, as I mentioned earlier, the requirements for compliance with the zoning, when we're dealing with existing buildings that might want to do an exterior renovation or do an add-on, we do have provisions, in the TCMU where you're required to meet to the greatest extent practicable, meaning what you can reasonably do on your site, given that you have an existing building, given that you can't access the rear to move your parking. So, we'll work with property owners who are going through any renovation. If what you're talking about is an incremental renovation to the property and not completely demolishing and building a new structure.
Very good, Juliet. Thank you very much. So here are our poll results. I'm kind of pleased to see that 47%, largest single number, agree. 32% strongly agree. That's 79% total that agree to different shape or form. We do have neutral, no opinion, 11%, and 11% strongly disagree. But again, this is a great kind of snapshot poll during live as we're doing this. This helps us out a lot. And thank you for participating in this. Okay, let's see about moving on to more stuff. Signage, that's kind of a key thing. We've talked a little bit about it with zoning, but David Drive, you can see from this picture, sign clutter related to the number and the size of business signs is a definite aesthetic impact here. Addressing signage is a major way to improve the aesthetics of David Drive within the study area. We feel this is true. The plan itself, which was adopted in 2019, did call for reducing sign clutter, and there was a lot of support from the public. In the plan itself, there had been a poll. 65% strongly supported it, 27% supported it. Overwhelming numbers, 1% strongly opposed, 1% opposed, and there was 6% with no opinion. So it's got a lot of support and backing addressing signage in this area. This is kind of just a brief kind of primer or visual aspect of signs. The top is your detached signs, which we call pole signs. You get everything from the big Pelican Point one on the left, multi-tenant building here next to it, all kind of different little signs for each tenant within a building, small little wooden sign, even the little massage parlor sign, that's still considered a sign and it is subject to regulations. On the bottom row, you've got what we commonly call monument signs. We're going to talk about those. These are all in the Fat City area on the left, and the one on the right is on Metairie Road. You can see you can even do that for a multi-tenant building. All these are for multi-tenants, but even you can do a single tenant. McDonald's on Severn and West Esplanade has just the arches in a nice monument sign. Let's look at your different types of attached signs. There's plenty of them. The first on the upper left is a marquee, on the big face of a building. The one in the middle, of course, you've got your main just basic wall sign. You've got window lettering. That's a sign. If you look in your lower left, that's a canopy sign. There's a hanging sign, Mark Twain's Pizza Landing over on Metairie Road. That's attached. You can even do things like paint sides of the building with, talking about your services, like at Johnny's. And the one on the far lower right, we wanted to bring this forward because this shows you another way in which signs could get in there kind of insidiously. Windows, people putting signs in windows and posters, or just temporary putting up little plastic posters, as you see in this building. The only real sign that's permanent here is the one over the door, but all these other ones in the windows are considered to be signs as well and are subject to regulation. We'll give you a quick comparison of what's the current sign standards and what we expect to be doing under TCMU. Under C1 with the CPZ overlay, which is current, you can have pole signs, roof signs, monument signs. They're limited to 1 square foot per lineal foot of your lot frontage, not your building frontage, but your lot frontage, or 300 feet. Again, that's a 10 by 30 rectangular sign when you think about it. Under the TCMU, your pole and roof signs would be prohibited. Your monument signs are allowed at half the size of which they're allowed under C1. That's half a square foot per linear foot of site frontage, or 50 square feet. Again, about 5 by 10 or 7 by 7. On the pole signs, they're limited to 30 feet, and you can get an additional foot per foot setback from the property line up to 40-foot maximum. Big, tall signs on David Drive. Monument sign is limited to 10 feet. That should give you clearance over most cars. And your attached signs are limited to 3 square feet per linear foot of building frontage currently, or 15% of your elevation area, whichever's less. Under the TCMU, it'd be half that. Your attached signs would be limited to 1.5 square feet per linear foot of building frontage, or 100 square feet, whichever is less. Impacts to existing signs. We did some research on this, did a full analysis of all the signs that exist out there. We found that with proposed rezoning to TCMU, all the pole signs would become non-conforming, and 45 pole signs would be classified as non-conforming, and they are spread throughout the length of David Drive. They're not focused in one area. They're all along David Drive. They could be easily, replaced with monument signs. We wouldn't tell them they couldn't have any signs. They could replace it with a monument sign. And now, how would we address this how would we actually address the signage if this was to come into effect at TCMU? Now, normally, in the case of rezoning, like we're discussing
Bruce,
here. Yes, ma'am.
I apologize, but before we move on to discussing this particular action item for signage, what I would like, if you don't mind, is I would like the participants in this meeting to know that you and your team did a full inventory of all of the signs along the David Drive corridor, not just pole signs, and that you have documented and done some rough calculations of all of the signs. And I apologize if you were going to get to that in a minute as it relates to the attached signage, but I did want to make it clear to those listening that the sizes of signs that we are proposing for the TCMU are actually in line with the size signs that are out there actually on businesses today. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, very accurate. There's very few signs that would have to be in long-term adjusted. Most of them do fit the current qualifications for TCMU.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to, it suddenly hit me that we didn't actually have a slide that addressed that. And I did want to make sure the audience understood that if we do go with this TCMU option, that I believe there's like three attached signs of the whole corridor that are affected, and it's like barely over the allowed size,
right.
Under the proposal. So I just wanted to explain that for the audience. Thank you.
No, thank you. Now, normally, as I was mentioning, it'd be great, that we were going to have new signage regulations, and normally, in the case of a rezoning, the resulting non-conforming signs, pole signs or signs in a building, they're grandfathered in, and they can remain as is unless the property is redeveloped or has major renovations, or as we talked about earlier, is burned down or something like that. But another option is available, and that's the use of amortization. Now, once the zoning is changed, the parish may require any non-conforming signs to be removed, but not immediately, only after a certain grace period or amortization period has passed. This time period can vary nationwide. 5 or 10 years is the usual window for such a grace or amortization period. And this actually was the path followed for the pole signs in Fat City. And the pole signs have been replaced in that area. If you drive along Severn, you go past, say, like Drago's, you'll see that there's no longer a pole sign. There's a very nice monument sign. This is common all throughout Fat City and along that Severn side of Fat City. Now, when the plan was completed by the parish in 2019, again, there was quite a lot of public support for this amortization approach. As you can see from this chart, 50% strongly supported it, 34% supported it. That's 84%, an overwhelming majority. There's a little bit of the opposed or strongly opposed, and 10% had no opinion. Just want to note that the amortization, the actual legal process for doing this, can be done as a separate standalone ordinance or as part of the rezoning along David Drive. We feel that this amortization approach would appear to be the best path forward for the parish to make a rather prompt and obvious visual change for the redevelopment of David Drive corridor in the Lafreniere sub-area. And I think we're ready for our next poll, which is going to ask you guys, how do you feel about signage? So, are you in favor of amortizing, that means removal after a certain time period, of the signs that are non-conforming along David Drive in the future? A would be yes, B would be yes with financial incentives, C would be no, and D is neutral, no opinion. So if you guys could, start putting in your answers, we'll do a little pop quiz. In the meantime, do we have any questions we want to address at the current time, Juliet and Brooke?
There are two questions related to traffic.
Okay.
So what I will say in regards to their questions regarding traffic is that, as Bruce mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the parish's improvements to David Drive are hopefully intending to address those traffic issues, and that there was actually a feasibility study conducted prior to the Lafreniere sub-area plan, and so that is really addressed more under the proposed David Drive improvements and other initiatives of the parish, and less so under this particular effort, which at this point is really focused on the zoning and implementation of the sub-area plan as it relates to the land use. So I know that's probably not what you want to hear as an answer to your question, but that's the honest answer, which is that that is addressed under the ongoing David Drive improvements and other initiatives of the parish. We have had some questions that I have actually answered, and there's an answer privately. Option one was a question for some email addresses to send questions to, which I'm sending directly to those people who asked those questions. And then also there was a comment that signs and windows are an existing code infraction. And we certainly agree with you. And that is something that we intend to address more explicitly in the proposed TCMU. And, you know, our PMZ, Property Maintenance Zoning Division, is tasked with doing that, with going out and issuing citations for violations. But I think we could address it a lot more explicitly, which we're proposing to do in the TCMU draft, that really gives some weight to the efforts of our PMZ inspectors.
Yep. Give some teeth. All right, so we've got
teeth is the word.
Okay. All right, so we've got our poll results up. B is an overwhelming favorite, yes, with financial incentives. Yes, itself, just as is, 24 is very large. So what we're looking at here is about 95% of people do favor amortizing and removing after a certain time period signs along David Drive, though we do have a pretty large percentage that does want to explore perhaps doing this with financial incentives for the owners. Well, I thank everybody for helping out with that poll as well.
And Bruce, if I could, just to clarify in regards to the financial incentives, we have not identified what those financial incentives necessarily would or could be. I think at this point in the process, we were just wanting to understand, was that something that would be of interest, and whether or not that's something we should continue to pursue as we move forward with any potential amortization. So.
Good point.
Thank you.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about housing. Our general method is to support a variety of housing types by changing the residential zoning in certain areas. And there's two paths that we're looking at here that are a little different. The first of these is to promote higher density residential on some lots, not all of them, but some lots bordering the park. The general idea being is that if you had a higher zoning classification, you're allowed to have a little bit more height. The park is a natural attraction and a beautiful viewpoint. And by building a little higher and having a little more density, you'll be able to have views of the park, similar to what you see here near Abatement Park in New Orleans. That's one tack that we would take. And it's interesting, the other one is that we, in some areas within Linwood Park and Park Manor, the two residential areas near the park, we would lower the density, which may be able to facilitate conversion to single family. This picture itself is on Park Manor. In our research and all our analysis and field work, we found this one. This appears to be the only single family conversion in the area. It's right up next to the single family zoned areas along Judith. and it looks very nice. But we think this type of conversion should be encouraged. The only thing is right now, under the current RR3 zoning, you can't do that, or you're not supposed to do that. So let's look at it on a map and kind of go over what we're talking about. If you look here, this is the area to the west, northwest of the park. It's called Linwood Park. It's kind of a hidden area, but most of the area is comprised of doubles. The ones outlined in pink or the 3 units, the triplexes. They're scattered kind of within the site. One big site in the middle there that's zoned R3 is the site of the old school. That's now where they're building a new apartment complex. What we'd like to do is to perhaps, first off, that area there on the western side of Longwood Drive would be part of the new TCMU zoning classification, along with the lots on David Drive. But what we'd like to do is right across from where the new apartment complex, the Lafreniere Living, which is currently under construction, 4 stories tall, pretty much right across from that, we would zone a small section that backs up to the park to R3 multifamily, which would allow a higher height. You'd probably have to maybe start to consolidating some of these lots or combining them to build such a structure. But again, this may be something in which you could do a taller building and have views of the park. But at the same time, within the center, we would look to rezone that center from RR3 to R2. All the doubles would remain, all the triples would remain. However, this would enable people, if they wanted to, they own one, to convert one of these doubles to a single family home. Now let's look over at the other side of the park, the north side of the park. Oh, I'm sorry. This does provide a full variety of housing types. Just want to reiterate, the R2 allows both 1 and 2 family residential and facilitates your conversion to singles. And the R3 allows 2, 3, 4, 5+ family residential and greater density height, 50 feet automatically compared to 35 feet. So yeah, let's look over at Park Manor on the north side. Here's a map of Park Manor. You can see from this map, again, most of them are doubles. The ones outlined in pink are triplexes. There's a few 4plexes in green. There's different apartment complexes in the area. There's the post office service facility here. And there's single family over on Judith. What we're looking to do is perhaps say that along the south side, including this would be zoned from RR3 to R3. All this area is, again, overlooks the park and would be able to maybe facilitate conversion to perhaps higher density and higher buildings. However, at the same time, over towards the eastern side of the neighborhood, which backs up to a single family neighborhood, we would convert this to R2, which would also enable conversion to singles. And I might want to add, if you look down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that one lot that's outlined in yellow, that's the one that's currently a single family home. And the same thing applies. This gives you the full variety of housing types. Your R2 rezoning allows both 1 and 2 family residential, facilitates the conversion to singles. The R3 allows 2, 3, 4, and 5+ family residential, allows greater density and height, 50 feet compared to 35. So our last poll question of the night. We want to ask you about the residential rezoning I just presented to you. If we can get that final poll question up. There it is. Regarding the residential zoning recommendations within the study area, which do you support? A, you're in favor of all the proposed zoning recommendations. B, you're only in favor of changes that permit single family. C, you're only in favor of changes that permit the higher density zoning. D, the zoning should remain as is. Or E, neutral, no opinion. So y'all take a few seconds, think about it, and give us your response. Again, this will be the last
I'd like to bring up, we have a question. There's a person who owns a triplex in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And their question is, what will this do to taxes?
Okay. Does anybody with Jefferson Parish want to take that? Would you like me to answer that?
I'll be honest, we can't anticipate what result this would have on your property taxes. Now, granted, if you make improvements to your property, or, there are overall properties and property values in the area rise, that's a consequence of the overall property value rising. As far as to your specific property, I don't think we can answer that. And I would also say, just as a reminder, if you were to make investments in your property, again, that's where that restoration tax abatement program comes into play. It helps you offset the investment you're making in the property by, allowing you to pay lower taxes before you made the investment. So hopefully that addresses some of your questions, again, without knowing which specific property you're referring to.
Right. And again, as long as, we're not sure exactly where it is, but, the rezoning of a property itself doesn't won't immediately or directly affect, the property taxes of the property.
Correct.
Okay, we about ready?
And I think that kind of answers another question we got. I'm in favor of zoning changes.
I apologize. I think we're losing Brooke. So I don't hear her. I think she was addressing the fact that there was a question that states getting doubles converted to single is difficult as it's not financially feasible. And I think we understand the difficulty. I think what we're proposing is at least providing the opportunity, if somebody purchases property and they'd like to live near the park, but they aren't necessarily interested in managing a double or, living in one side and renting out the other. We want to provide the opportunity. And then finally, we had a comment that if the David Drive commercial takes over the Longwood Drive residential, and so this ties to what Bruce was showing, where that first bit of Longwood is proposed for the TCMU, then the residential across the street will be facing the back of the commercial property, which would take away the privacy of the residential neighborhood. So we appreciate that comment. I think that is something for us to consider as we are looking at whether or not to include that Longwood portion in the proposed TCMU. That's, I think, a different perspective than one we maybe initially thought of. And so we will definitely take that into consideration when we make a final recommendation of any mapping or proposed zoning changes. So thank you.
Okay. All right. So we've got our poll results in. The largest single is I'm in favor of all proposed zoning recommendations at 50%. Tied is I am only in favor of changes that permit single family or neutral no opinion at 18. The zoning should remain as is right behind those at 14. And no one said they were only in favor of changes that permit higher density zoning. So it's kind of an interesting mixed bag here, just kind of discussing what we have. But again, we do appreciate it, and that will be the final poll question of the evening. Okay, moving on, just to give you guys a visual summary of what the zoning changes as proposed will be. Firstly, up in the north section along Veterans Boulevard, the high-intensity commercial-oriented Veterans Boulevard would stay. Be no zoning changes recommended in this area. Then when you get into the residential areas, we're looking at higher density residential option along the park boundary there and there. It goes a little further. Actually, it'd only be along the park. You have existing higher density right there, but in general. Then you'd have lower density, single family residential option here and here. So you've got kind of both options available. And then finally, along David Drive, we're looking at a neighborhood supportive center for live, work, play, a new town center. People can walk from the neighborhoods up and down it. Eventually, with the Soniat Greenway, there will be a bridge. That's part of the proposal across the canal from the single-family neighborhoods over to the west. People can go along this area and walk it, and hopefully it'll be a lot nicer to see. And then finally, we're going to jump back a little bit to the residential again. And I'm turning over to Nick, who's going to talk about some visual improvements in the residential areas. Nick?
Thanks, Bruce. I'll move quickly. I know we're in the second hour here. This is just a kind of quick visual overview. So you can go to the next slide.
All right.
This just came up in one of the comments. Parking is a big issue. Visual clutter is a bunch of cars. There's a lot of parking on sidewalk, not on sidewalks, but on the side of the road, over the curb, things like that. You can go to the next slide. Challenges like a flat facade. Some of the architecture ends up being a little bit dated or without sort of architectural nuance. Parking in the front yard, so there's a lot of use of front lawns as parking, or just yards that are completely paved, and false entrances, like you can see here on the right. If you can go to the next one. But plenty of positive elements. If you look through the neighborhood, there's plenty of beautiful homes, well-maintained, good landscaping. Part of what we're talking about and looking for here is not just about the architecture, but different scales of landscaping that provide some visual relief. You can go to the next one. A well-maintained exterior, small landscaping sometimes does the job. Certainly bigger trees are helpful. You can go to the next slide. Over paving, we already talked about that. One possible solution to that, this is another example on the right that's in the neighborhood. It's a little bit more of a commercial look, and it's certainly attached housing as opposed to detached single family housing. But just the simple kind of commercial approach where you've got islands there separating the parking a little bit. You still get a lot of parking, but it provides a nicer visual amenity for some of those sixplexes that exist in the neighborhood, which are a 3 next to a 3 that share entryways. And then good old-fashioned trees, can't argue with that. Takes a long time, certainly for growth, but that's something that can help as well over time. Next one. And certainly, there's a mid-century flavor to a lot of these ranch-style homes. A lot of very popular across the country right now are renovating some of fairly plain-looking ranches from the 70s into more mid-century style homes. Sometimes that's just a change of doors and window style. Sometimes it's a coat of paint, things like that. There's a couple examples here that do a good job of fairly simple renovations of fairly simplistic homes. Next. Same thing here, a couple more examples. Wood screen in the carport area. Recessed entry can provide a little bit of depth to the facade, or an expressed entry if you just add a covered little portico. Sometimes that can add a little visual element that helps break up the front facade. Another possible solution, there's already been a couple comments about converting 2 units to 1. Certainly that's a challenge. Again, the idea of implementing the zoning changes is that that's possible over time, as Juliet said. Certainly if, long time from now, if one of the homes was where it was easier to demolish and build new, certainly you could build a single family home and convert one of those, thus converting a double unit to 1. Or like Juliet said, you can do a conversion if you wanted to live and not manage another unit. But we do recognize that a lot of these units are entirely renter occupied, and that is fairly common in the neighborhood. This is just quickly to show, there's a lot of these are not just a diagram, these are actually the cars that were parked in the aerial at the time this was taken. We just wanted to show that a lot of cars that end up parking on the green strip. And so there's a potential to use the entire right-of-way and renovate the entire street. If you go to the next slide, you can actually fit as many cars, and actually in some cases more throughout the neighborhood if you get rid of some of the driveways. So most of the properties have 2 driveways. Some have 3 or even more, where the entire front yard is paved. And so we just wanted to play out the scenario and show that it's that if you allow street parking and create a permeable surface, instead of the grassed area on the street side of the sidewalk, you can go to the next slide, you can see a little bit closer. So that strip becomes a parking area rather than having to pull over a curb and park there as people are already doing. You can allow it as a parking area, and then that you're parking right up next to the sidewalk, but it keeps cars off the front lawn. Again, it's the parking on the front lawn. Someone's commenting about, too many people living there, too many cars, code enforcement, all those sorts of things. That's certainly all true. It is difficult to enforce, though, too. So sometimes through improvements like this, it's possible to help mitigate some of those issues where you're only parking one or so cars per unit, and then the other cars end up on the street. So this is just playing that out visually. You can flip through these, Bruce. You can use planters and landscaping, simple additions, wood screen, just to update, hide the utilities, things like that. This would be considered kind of smaller scale renovation, although we recognize there's certainly a cost to it. You can go to the next one. The idea of the single conversion also comes with the idea of a setback relaxation. This was introduced in Terrytown as well, where the 20-foot setback that's required is relaxed, and you allow it to go to 10 feet. And what that gives you is more square footage. So if you are doing a renovation, it may become worth it to you if you are able to gain that extra square footage, add an extra room, expand a family room, all that kind of thing. So this is just an example showing where a double would in fact be turned into a single and what that might look like. Certainly less. Yep.
If I may, I just do want to address up front regarding the issue of relaxing a front yard setback. That is not something that we are proposing at this time under any recommended zoning changes. That's something we're exploring as an option, as Nick said, not just looking at here, but it's also something we had started talking about and looking at with regards to Terrytown. And so if we were to look at making that a possibility or a regulation that we would put on the parish's books, it would be accompanied by some standards as to when and where it could be applied as a by right option, which is not to say that a property owner who is interested in something like this couldn't come up with a good plan and, at today, go to the BZA and ask for a front yard setback. What we're looking at, what we're exploring is a way that we could make that where you don't have to go through the BZA process, but it would have to be tied to some other standard or to achieving like what we're trying to do in Terrytown or improvements we're trying to do here in Lafreniere. So we are still exploring that as an option. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. Sorry, I'm sort of implying that all these things are tied to the zoning. That one in particular is sort of exploratory. But if you have comments on it, we'd still be happy to hear it. Next slide. I think that's it.
That's it for you. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. All right. Questions and comments. First off, before we answer, I think we got 3 questions that are still up on the board. And we can take some other things. But before we get into that, just want to let you guys know, further information can be found on the website, jeffparish.net/Lafreniere plan. And if you have any further questions about the planning and the zoning aspects, you can send those to me at NY Associates. I'll leave that up on the board. And before we get into the next one, we're going to have some more information directly for Annalisa Kelly, for if anyone's interested in the restoration tax abatement. But before we get into that, maybe we might want to see about answering any more questions that are up on the board. Juliet, Brooke?
Yes, Bruce. One of the questions we have is, what impact will this have on the residential between West Napoleon and West Metairie? None. Those areas are not included in this particular study area. So all of the residential that is located between West Napoleon and West Metairie was not looked at as part of the initial Lafreniere sub-area plan. And as you could see on the map, as Bruce was going through the recommended zoning changes, those areas are not included either. We did have a question from somebody who I think is watching this through Facebook, and they were asking if a copy of the plan is available online. The answer is yes. As you can see on the screen, jeffparish.net/Lafreniere plan. You can link to the original Adopt the Lafreniere sub-area plan, and we will be posting tonight's presentation to that same page. They were also asking for information about the traffic study. I believe that is also available, and I'm going to confirm that while I'm sitting here in front of my computer. That the David Drive, the David Drive corridor plan is also available from the parish website. But what we will do is we will put a link to that from the Lafreniere plan page as well before the end of the week. And then finally, I think there was a question in regards to, as it relates to the number of vehicles parked throughout occupancy standards. And what I'll say is that, the parish does have, from both a zoning perspective, but also from a building code, obviously there are occupancy standards, which are, we'll just be honest, are very difficult to enforce in a private residence. And so you also have to sort of be cautious that, there's fair housing that comes into play. The parish, does not have the right to just knock on a door and demand to know how many people are staying in a house at any given time. So that is something that we have limitations to be able to address. I think the best we can do is look at where we know we have numbers of occupants, how do we address parking for them, to just be honest. So,
okay.
And I think the last is really more a comment, which I appreciate, which is, again, recognizing we need to improve this area. And this participant in the meeting is willing to reach out to family and friends who own a bit in the area, and be a part. So thank you for being in tonight's meeting. Thank you all for your comments and, participating via the polls and the feedback you've given us. As Nick said, we have gone a little over an hour. And it looks like we do have 2 hands raised. I believe. So Joe, who I think your hand has been raised since the beginning of the meeting. So if our host could unmute Joe. Let's see. Brooke, are you able to?
Yeah, I've allowed them to unmute themselves, but it looks like their hand has been lowered. Okay, so maybe okay. And I think the other one is Althea. Brooke's going to unmute you. Okay. Are you there, Althea? You may need to unmute on your own screen as well. All the way at the bottom, there's a little microphone. If it has a slash through it, you'll need to click that to unmute. All right, Althea, I apologize. We're not hearing anything, but as you can see on the screen, there is an email address for Bruce. So if you would like to, after the meeting, send Bruce an email with either your comment or your question, we will certainly follow up with you.
Yes, and we're asking everyone, thanks, Juliet, we're asking everyone to get your comments and questions to us within the next 10 days, the standard time period after public meetings, public hearings. And again, you can send them to me directly at my email. If you have any questions, call me during office hours, 504-885-0500 office, or you can call me on my cell, preferably during office hours. If you got a second, go ahead and write those down. And again, this will be available online, the entire presentation. But I also we wanted to share with you, for those people who are interested in the restoration tax abatement program, if you have any comments or further questions on that, you can send those to Annalisa Kelly. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Policy at JEDCO, spoke about it earlier. That's akelly@jedco.org, and there's her office number. You can reach her during business hours. If you're interested in the program and getting your, rental property or owner property or business along there, start doing some renovations and hopefully get the tax credit, she'd be the person to talk to.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone who has questions about this program, who may be interested in undertaking those renovations to their properties, whether it's commercial or residential, to reach out, and we'll be happy to give you more information and assist in that process. And again, this is even available because the council recently created a district that would enable this program to be available within the Lafreniere area. So we'll be happy to provide more information if you reach out to me either by email or by phone. Thanks.
Thank you, Annalisa. And with that, let's go through real quickly the next steps in our process. First off, we're going to take these comments that we had tonight and any further ones in the next 10 days on the implementation plan. We will be preparing all the final documents, including an overall report, any plan amendments, any zoning text, working on that. All this will have to go through the legal channels, the Planning Advisory Board public hearing, and then final consideration by the Parish Council. So the public has more opportunity to comment on this and to come to the Planning Advisory Board and the Parish Council meetings when these things are actually ready for implementation and action by the parish entities. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending. We had a great turnout tonight, up to 40 or more participants at various times. And sorry it took a little while, but it's kind of hard to do this, virtually. But again, thanks everyone for attending, and we look forward to getting more comments and input from the public. Y'all have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Y'all have a good night.